Today's tip on the surface is about blade components and it's about solving bugs with double encoding. But I promise there's a deeper lesson here, and I think an interesting one that is good to apply in all sorts of scenarios where we're given advice. And maybe the advice is from a fellow programmer on how to fix something. Maybe the advice is coming from a coding agent. But let's take a look at a problem, walk through it, show the right solution, and kind of get to that lesson toward the end. So I have a very simple blade component here. It's a contact card. It's got a name and it's got a title. There's nothing fancy going on here, but let me show what the problem is. All right, so we have Maria D'Angelo, but the apostrophe is being double encoded. So this is a very common problem when working with Blade and compiled HTML and trying to do this securely, because a Laravel has built-in protections against cross-site scripting and other things that could get us into trouble. So if we look back at this, in fact, let's take a look at the contact card component. Nothing really fancy going on here, literally just rendering a view. And then if we look at the view that goes with it, it's just taking those attributes and echoing them out, right? It's using the normal double brace. So here's where the interesting part comes in. Maybe you already see the problem. I certainly see it. I've run into this a bunch of times on projects. But here's the interesting bit. Sometimes you will get a suggestion to fix this that's like, oh yeah, to work around that, because these things get encoded in two places. You just want to replace this with like the unsafe, I don't know if that's the name for this or not, but with this. And that will solve the problem. It might introduce other problems though, but it's missing the point. But that's a common suggestion that I have seen with this double encoding problem. Even worse, there is a way to turn off double encoding globally in your app at like the Blade facade level. Don't do that either. But these are common things that I've seen. Like back when you'd search Stack Overflow or whatever, I would see people offering that as a suggested solution to the problem. And you know what? If I try it and it works, all right, my feature shipped, I'm done. But the correct problem, or the correct solution to this problem, is to identify that we're not using Blade components correctly. One thing we're not doing here is there are no properties on this Blade component. And maybe this jumped out to you. We're digging into attributes to get the name and the title. Like, that's really intended for things like class and ID and title, like HTML attributes, hence the name. So the proper solution isn't to turn off any encoding protections, but to actually just use Blade components properly. So we would come in here and we would do this, we'd set up a constructor, and we can just keep it simple. Like we can do name, title. All right, so we don't need any logic in there, but we're just going to set up that. And then we would just come in here and we would say name, right? We don't have to do anything fancy with digging into the attribute bag. This is how it's intended to be used. Like, in fact, if you look at the Blade component documentation, this is how it shows you to do it. But it's so easy to gloss over this if somebody else is telling you to, just turn off encoding. So just to keep us honest, if I come back here, yes, now that looks like we expect. Now, a fun little side fact. This tip was originally published as a written article back in 2023. And at the time, I even had some links I think I found to Stack Overflow responses that were telling people to do the wrong thing that I just demonstrated. But now, it is much later, it's 2026. I thought, well, what would Codex, what would Claude say to do? So I actually gave it these problem files, no context at all. I didn't prompt it in any way. I just said, hey, this is the output I'm getting. What is the right way to solve this? And to my surprise, my pleasant surprise, both of them came back and mentioned you could turn off the escaping, but then said don't do that for security reasons. What you want to do is you probably don't want to use attributes. You want to use component properties. Here's how you set that up with a constructor. And it actually gave the correct solution. So that actually makes me feel good if that's where people are going for advice these days instead of Google or Stack Overflow. Maybe the quality of advice is getting a little better. I don't know if that's a global truth, but at least in this one particular case it was. But anyways, the deeper lesson I want to take away that doesn't have anything to do specifically with blade or double encoding is when you're given a solution to a problem, whether it's a person or you find an article or something, make sure you understand, why is that a solution? Is it bypassing the problem? Is it glossing over a deeper problem that I should instead address? It takes a little bit of extra effort and requires some understanding, and it takes more time than a simple copy-paste solution, but it's going to lead to better code and it's going to build your understanding. So hopefully you found that useful.